Ladies and gentlemen, we got our third video of the day here, and it's an important one. We're going to harken back to the presidential debates from last week. I know you're tired of hearing about them already, but I want to parse out something in particular. When Chris Wallace bungled up a question about President Trump banning critical race theory at the federal level for a bunch of different branches of government, he had it described as sensitivity training or racial awareness anti-bias training, when in fact President Trump banned critical race theory. And critical race theory is just a branch on a rotten tree of critical theory that ranges back to the time of the French intellectuals with Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, and the like, with their postmodernism, and then of course slather on a bit of Marxism. And as Jordan Peterson likes to call him, the postmodern neo-Marxist, and that's who's carrying out this evil, awful, racist doctrine that's being taught in colleges, and I have proof of that, just in case you thought that this was all a myth, much like Joe Biden likes to call Antifa a myth. But before we dive into the cesspit that is critical race theory, I just want to thank everybody for taking a chance on a brand new channel here. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to watch these. Put a lot of thought into this stuff, and if you also have any thoughts on critical race theory, critical theory, intersectionalism, or any of those other word salad horseshit ideologies, feel free to drop that in the comment section down below. Or if you'd like to try to change my mind and tell me why this is such a great thing, I'm open for debate on the topic, because I haven't heard a good case for it before, and I don't think that's likely to change. And while you're down there, if you don't mind hitting that subscribe button or just dropping a like on the video, it definitely helps to grow the channel, and that's what we're trying to do here, because we are all about truth, honesty, and just having a laugh. I don't see that enough out there today, so we're going to try to do it here, and if you'd like to be a part of that, I would love to have you. So we'll start here with this Time article. President Trump has attacked critical race theory. Here's what to know about the intellectual movement. There's nothing intellectual about critical race theory. Spoiler. During the first general election presidential debate on Tuesday night, President Donald Trump was asked to explain his administration's directive to all federal agencies to stop anti-bias training that rely on critical race theory or addresses white privilege. I ended it because it's racist. I ended it because a lot of people were complaining that they were asked to do things that were absolutely insane, that it was a radical revolution that was taking place in our military, in our schools, all over the place, Trump said, though he did not directly answer moderator Chris Wallace's question about whether he believes that systemic racism exists in the United States. I can answer that for you. It doesn't. It's just another one of those word salad, hyperbolic words that doesn't really mean that much. Sure, was there systemic racism during the civil rights era? By all means. Black people were not treated exactly the same. They didn't have all the same rights. And guess what? That was in the 60s. We are 70 years nearly on from that point. So stop with the excuses. Most of those people aren't alive, or right now are shitting in depends in the nursing homes, or running for president under the Democratic ticket. All of this shit has been resolved. Fucking deal with it. The rest of it can be explained away by poor choices and not improving your own standard by not taking on responsibility for yourself. We were paying people hundreds of thousands of dollars to teach very bad ideas, and frankly, very sick ideas. And really, they were teaching people to hate our country, and I'm not going to allow that to happen. Well, that is part of the critical race theory that also branches down from the entire tree that is critical theory. Because there's not only critical race theory, there's critical sex theory that goes under the title of critical gender theory. Every sort of potential word you can throw in between critical and theory, there's a branch of this moronic ideology out there that really has no basis in anything, and we'll get to that. The directive to federal agencies wasn't the only time Trump had taken aim at critical race theory. While speaking at the National Archives Museum for Constitution Day in September, it says this month, but we'll editorialize a bit, President Trump denounced it as toxic propaganda that will destroy our country. And it will. And it's seeped into not just the United States, but Canada. I've got a source for that in a minute. The UK is being ravaged by it, by the way. But we'll get into understanding it right now. So what is critical race theory? Critical race theory offers a way of seeing the world that helps people recognize the effects of historical racism in modern American life. The intellectual movement behind the idea was started by legal scholars as a way to examine how laws and systems uphold and perpetuate inequality for traditionally marginalized groups. In Richard Delgado and Jean Steph Kunt book Critical Race Theory, an Introduction or Indoctrination, they define the critical race theory movement as a collective of activists and scholars interested in studying and transforming the relationship among race, racism, and power. Sure, once again, you come across these situations whenever you see people talking about these hyperbolic, fucking quasi-intellectual movements like they are just trying to do something good for the population out there. They always want to lift up the little man, at least they say they do. But all this is doing is just trying to find and pick holes instead of finding solutions. And that's what I explained. I think it was in my liberal mindset video where you see crazy people everywhere. This type of theory only serves to find criticisms and everything. It's like that bitchy little sister, that bitchy little aunt that you have that always picks away at shit. It's like, oh, your coat's not very nice. Oh, it doesn't fit as good as last year. If you're ever tired of hearing those claims and you'd like to escape that, make sure you steer well clear of these toxic, evil, racist ideas. Kimberlé Crenshaw, I think, one of the founding scholars, she must have gave herself that title, of CRT. It sounds more like a disease now. I like that better. We'll start referring to it as that. And the executive director and co-founder of the African American Policy Forum says that critical race theory is a practice, a way of seeing how the fiction of race, has been transformed into concrete racial inequities. Well, I don't know about you, but I can look at a Latin person and see that they're of Latin descent. I can see a black person and see that they are of Southern American or African heritage. I can look at myself in the mirror and realize that I am 75% Ukrainian, Scottish, and Irish. I don't think that's fictional at all, but I'm not a scholar of critical race theory. Link in the description to the rest of this article, but I'll just speed up the process. Who came up with this ancient worldly idea? The critical race theory movement officially came into being at a 1989 workshop led by Crenshaw, Neil Gotanda, and Stephanie Phillips at the St. Benedict Center in Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah, really well thought through, I'd imagine. But the ideas behind the movement had been brewing for years by this point. In the 1970s, a group of legal scholars and activists developed the theory, building on the work of the movements like critical legal theory and racial feminism and radical feminism. Exactly. So, if when you were a kid and you used to build sand castles and you had your buckets full of sand and you tried to keep them up against a rising tide on the beach, and if you ever decided that you wanted to build those sand castles on a bit of a base, normally you'd choose something like clay that you might dig up, or maybe a little stronger substance like a little bit of grass. But no, these people decided that they wanted to build CRT on a pile of horse shit. Like I was saying, you could literally insert any sort of propagandistic idea in there. Yeah. So then you have critical legal theory. No, there are agreed upon pieces of legislation like the Constitution, Bill of Rights. There's no need to dissect those things. They are widely accepted law at this point, you fucking maniacs. Civil rights lawyer Derek Bell, who is the first tenured black professor at Harvard Law School, came up with this terrible shit, is often credited as the father of critical race theory. His 1980 Harvard Law Review article, Brown versus Board of Education and the Interest Convergence Dilemma, is often cited as an integral piece in starting conversations about critical race theory movement. It's kind of like when a Mormon comes to your door and they'd like to have a conversation about the works of Joseph Smith. You just want to slam the door in their face. Other founding scholars of CRT include Richard Delgado, Alan Freeman, Patricia Williams, Mary Matsuda, and Brittany Crenshaw, right? Who also coined the term Intersectionality. I'm sure you've heard of it before. That's when you keep creating these, well, you believe that the entirety of society is founded on hierarchies, which, you know, like most of these other ideologies that are out there, they're all founded on this idea that is generally well accepted. The idea that Black Lives Matter is a relatable and agreeable statement, and then you found your idea of intersectionality on all of society is created on hierarchies, which is true. Except they don't believe that you can ascend those hierarchies because you are either some sort of a marginalized group, like you are a woman, you are not white, disabled, fat, which is kind of disabled. It's an infinite amount of cross sections of society that intersect in order to create a marginalized person and create an oppressor class, which is always the straight white male. But that's just what time thinks. Let's go to the standard textbook definition from the Encyclopedia of Philosophy from Stanford. Not exactly a shit institution. Critical theory has a narrow and broad meaning in philosophy and the history of the social sciences. Critical theory is a narrow sense designated several generations of German philosophers and social theorists in the Western European Marxist tradition known as the Frankfurt School. According to these theorists, a critical theory may be distinguished from a traditional theory according to the specific practical purpose. A theory is critical to the extent it seeks human emancipation from slavery, acts as a liberating influence, and works to create a world that satisfies the needs and powers of human beings. Because such theories aim to explain and transform all the circumstances that enslave human beings, many critical theories, in the broader sense, have been developed. They have emerged in connection with many social movements that identified varied dimensions of the domination of human beings in modern society. In both the broad and narrow senses, however, a critical theory provides the descriptive and normative basis for social inquiry aimed at decreasing domination and increasing freedoms in all their forms. Essentially, what they're looking for is to flip the hierarchies on their head. They want to take down every single oppressor down to their level. And that's when you see Marxist pop right off that first paragraph. That is all Marxist theology is 100% about. It's about making everybody equal, right? It's all about equality. Everybody has an equal chance to starve in Venezuela. Everybody has an equal chance to be sent to the gulags in the USSR. And that's the foundation for critical theory. It is murderous by nature when it carried out to its absolute extents. But I'll take it a step further because, as you know, a couple of the videos that are on this channel and even more have at least referenced the works of Dr. Peterson. But the two specific ones I pointed out that go over Jordan Peterson's theories involve the works of the French intellectuals from the 18th and 19th centuries. And all of this critical theory work was really laid, the foundations were laid by their postmodern view on the world, which postmodernism is another term that you may or may not be familiar with, kind of like critical theory, where it just looks to deconstruct the entire world based on power hierarchies. When we read through this article here, you see that they are once again adopting one of the strategies that I laid out earlier of hiding behind a very agreeable and widely accepted terminology. And I'll explain it further once we get through these first few paragraphs. One of the most characteristic inventions of modern French culture is the intellectual. Intellectuals in France are not just experts in their particular fields, such as literature, art, philosophy, and history. They also speak in universal terms and are expected to provide moral guidance about general social and political issues. Indeed, the most eminent French intellectuals are almost sacred figures who become global symbols for the causes they championed. Thus, Voltaire's powerful denunciation of religious intolerance, Rousseau's rousing defense of republican freedom, Victor Hugo's eloquent tirade against Napoleonic despotism, Émile Zola's passionate plea for justice during the Dreyfus affair, and Simone de Beauvoir emancipation. Above all, intellectuals have provided the French with a comforting sense of national pride. Well, they got to be proud about something because they keep surrendering to everything else. As a progressive thinker, Edgar Quinet put it with a big dollop of Gaelic self-satisfaction, France's vocation is to consume herself for the glory of the world, for others as much as for herself, for an ideal which is yet to be obtained of humanity and world civilization. Ugh, could somebody be more self-absolved? But like you see here, those guys like Rousseau, Hugo, they were all championing very good, and especially under the veneer of the modern day lens, had very agreeable opinions. And then you eventually lead into the postmodernists who, under the guise of being a French intellectual and therefore are the foremost thinkers in the world, can slip in their shitty tactics. This French intellectualism has also manifested itself in a dazzling array of theories about knowledge, liberty, and the human condition. Successive generations of modern intellectuals, most of them schooled in the École Normée Supérieure in Paris, whatever, have hotly debated the meaning of life in books, newspapers, articles, petitions, reviews, and journals, in the process coining abstruse philosophical systems such as, and get ready for it, rationalism, eclecticism, spiritualism, republicanism, socialism, positivism, and existentialism. And they fail to mention the big one, postmodernism. This feverish theoretical activity came to a head in decades after World War II in the emergence of structuralism, a grand philosophy which underscores the importance of myths and the unconscious in human understanding. Its leading exponents were the philosopher of power and knowledge, Michel Foucault, who's the chief architect of this eventually murderous ideology, and the ethnologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, both professors at the Collège de France, or Collège de France, whatever. Fucking French, what are they gonna do? Not beat me? Because they shared the name of the famous brand of the American garments, Levi-Strauss received letters throughout his life asking for them to supply blue jeans. Well, maybe he could actually be useful at something. So that's to give you a little bit of a background into what basis was laid for critical theory, and intersectionalism, postmodernism all has its roots in these do-nothing overthinkers. Just like how Marx never actually got to practice communism, instead he was just a freeloader throughout his entire life, and him and Engels, his partner who you don't hear about nearly as much, just lived off the wealth of Engels's parents, and he eventually died broke and alone. But nobody wants to mention the fact that he also had, Marxists had a realization much later in life that, maybe his ideas that he worked so hard on were better left as theories and not exactly practical application. Because, hey, we can look back into the 20th century and realize that 150, 160 million dead people across several different nations, China, the USSR, Cambodia, Sub-Saharan Africa, all tried communism and paid a massive price. But these ideas are so easily exploitable. It's hilarious, because if you haven't heard of Peter Lindsay, James Boghossian, and Heather Pluckrose, I am going to absolutely brighten your day. Over the past 12 months, 3 scholars, James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, and Peter Boghossian, wrote 20 fake papers using fashionable jargon to argue for ridiculous conclusions and tried to get them placed. Oh, they didn't try in high-profile journals in the field, including gender studies, queer studies, and fat studies. Their success rate was remarkable. By the time they took their experiment public late on Tuesday, 7 of their articles had been accepted for publication by ostensibly serious peer-reviewed journals. 7 more were still going through the various stages of the review process. Only 6 of the 20 had been rejected. And because this is the Atlantic, and fuck the Atlantic, I won't be reading any further from there. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a, kind of slanted view on how the left views these 3 individuals. They did some great work. They are all employed in academia in one shape or fashion. And just a little heads up on what these articles that they wrote were. One was on homosexual proclivities of dogs in dog parks, rewriting sections of Mein Kampf and throwing in feminist jargon and rewriting it. And of course, one of their awarded papers, because they received awards for many of these papers, was on fat bodybuilding. Yeah, it's not easy to write a bad paper when you're talking about critical theory, intersectionality, and the like, because they have such a huge net that they cast over all of society. Everything that they espouse, that the straight white man is the devil. All you need to do is just look at who's the bumbling asshole in every single commercial. Who is the villain in most movies. It's normally, if it's any kind of a war film, it's always the old white general. And if you don't stand up and applaud at the end of the show, it's clearly because you're racist and are a misogynist piece of shit. Isn't that right? But I bet you're thinking, okay, yeah, this sounds terrible. Critical race theory, critical theory, intersectionality, Neo-Marxism, all sounds terrible. But is it actually being taught out there? Of course it is. Why would I bring it up if it wasn't? This is from Amherst College. Amherst College is a liberal arts college, and the general idea is people who graduated from colleges like this with a Bachelor of Arts degrees or Masters in Arts degrees would eventually become conservatives when they realize that those degrees really mean fuck all. They're just decorative wall hangings, and it doesn't matter if you're $40,000 in debt, $80,000 in debt. You're going to have to eventually work that off being a barista at Starbucks. But that just wasn't the case. Case in point, look at all of these cancel cultures that are going around at the big institutions out there, at the big corporations. These are bad ideas that prey on vulnerable people that are burdened with debt, and Marx theory, critical theory, all says that, you're being unjustly prosecuted because you're, white, female, disabled, I don't know, person of color, whatever, pick and choose. You can be oppressed, but it also works on the same, if you flip the coin over, you will eventually find yourself in the oppressor class, and once the takeover is complete, hopefully it isn't, banning critical race theory is a big step in the right direction, so this doesn't happen. Eventually you will be found out as an oppressor class and you will be terminated, because that's what happened in the USSR, for example, when they had the idea of the kulak. The kulak was a successful farmer, and that eventually went from employing a few people out on your farm to anybody who was able to turn out any sort of successful crop. And millions of my Ukrainian ancestry were starved to death during the famines. So while I never got to know them, I at least have some skin in this game. But here's the description of Marx and critical theory, which started in spring of 2014 and is still a course you can enroll in. Description: a critical theory has a distinctive aim to unmask the ideology falsely justifying some form of social or economic oppression. It reveals it as an ideology and, in doing so, to contribute to the task of ending that oppression. And so, why would you start a sentence with a parse? And so, a critical theory aims to provide a kind of enlightenment about social and economical life that is itself emancipatory. Persons come to recognize the oppression they are suffering as oppression, and thereby partly freed from it. Marx's critique of capitalist economic relations is arguably just this kind of critical theory. There you go. As participants in the capitalist market economy, we fall into thinking of the economy in terms of private property rights, free exchange, the laws of supply and demand, etc. And, in doing so, we fall into thinking the capitalist economy relations are as justified as how things should be. Marx argues that the way of thinking is nothing but ideology. It obscures even from the persons who suffer them the pervasive and destructive forms of alienation, powerlessness, and exploitation that, in Marx's view, define capitalistic economic relations. Geez, if you've ever seen anybody march behind a banner of the hammer and sickle or proudly proclaim themselves as being socialist, don't you normally see them using the tactics of alienation, making somebody feel powerless, and exploiting their situation? Yeah, it turns out that all these leftist assholes out there, all they do is project. They don't give a shit about the oppressed. They only hate the rich. And that's what this class teaches. Oh, you're being unfairly burdened, like I was saying earlier. Oh, guess what? It's not your fault. It's the system's fault. We have to tear down the system. It's not that colleges and universities like Amherst peddle out shitty degrees that will actually do nothing useful for you in life other than burden you and therefore create more Marxists and socialists out there until they get to rise to their glorious revolution. Yeah, I don't think so. Nip it in the bud. Get rid of this shit. I understand that it's already, 6 years deep here at the idiot center that is Amherst College, but let's see what these liberal arts degrees actually finds themselves creating. In doing research for this video, I was supremely disappointed in this last source that we're going to be using. Alberta Civil Liberties Research Center. Whiteness. Critical theory in action, people. Guess what? Us Canadians, us Albertans, aren't immune to this cancer. To combat racism today, it is necessary to understand the history of the ideology of race in order to challenge whiteness as the foundation of our racial categories and racism. God, there were really only two races in Alberta when I was born in 1990. I was going to say 1930, but this is where these people want to take us all back to. There were the natives that were here, and then there were the Eastern Europeans that came over. And now because this is a vogue ideology, they're trying to further segregate people because there's nothing behind this. The ideology of race. Give me a fucking break. See what they try to do with all of their different ideologies? They keep trying to deconstruct everything that's already been crystallized as absolute fact because they're never satisfied with actually finding answers. They only want to find problems so that there's never a solution for anything, so that they can keep on pushing that out there as a platform of, if you elect us or if you let us lead your company, we'll be able to fix these problems that we created to begin with. We'll just read a little bit more of this because it's this video's gone on long enough and I think I've made my point. At first glance, it may seem that common usage in Alberta, the word white is used to refer specifically to our color of race. Initially, this might seem like reverting back to or reinforcing the old and racist categories of European imperialism, and in some cases, it may in fact be meant that way. Dun dun dun! We are profoundly concerned, for example, by the increase in neo-Nazi white supremacist activity in our province. Cite the source, fucker. In our experience, however, we have found that when people refer to white people, either in self-identification or identifying individuals and groups, it is in fact because they are used a shorthand reference to whiteness, about which people we have varied understandings that you will need to clarify. In other words, it is being used as a shorthand for the privileges/power that people who appear white, receive because they are not subjected to the racism faced by people of color and indigenous people. Unless, of course, there are certain people of color or indigenous people who want to speak out about this horseshit ideology, then they're labeled as Uncle Toms if they're black or race traitors if they're anybody else. Like I said before, this is all projection, and they're trying to take down white as it's Caucasian whenever you fill out a form. But they'll just slander you as white because in a previous video I had the chart from the National African Americans wing of the Smithsonian where it said the things that were white or whiteness were things like time management, were things like planning for the future, hard work, everything that you need to be a successful individual. That's whiteness. And that's what they're trying to cure here at the lovely Alberta Civil Liberties Research Center. And this is in every state, every province, every country around the world. I want you to know about this stuff because it's evil. Don't listen to it. If your employer asks you to take these kind of trainings, refuse. Do not go along with this because it is pure propaganda and indoctrination. But if you are at least armed with the facts that I presented here in this video today, you can combat these ideas because they are murderous. No two ways about it. This will eventually lead to the race war, and it won't be fought along racial lines like a traditional race war would be. It'll be fought along ideological lines that are presented as the Puritans on one side and race traitors on the other. So I just wanted to clear up what critical race theory, intersectionality and the litany of other horseshit ideologies are that are out there right now, perverting schools, government, and hopefully not your company now that you know what the fuck you're dealing with. I thank you for the gift of your time, and especially now that we're taking this to 3 videos a day, folks, and I really appreciate everybody sticking around because this is a heavy topic, an important topic, and it's important, like I always say on this channel, get your facts straight so you can combat all the shitty ideas out there in the world and speak the truth as you have collected your facts. Thanks again, and I've been Don Consuelo, and I want you guys to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.